lanterns are proven to be dangerous, and balloons float for miles and take hundreds of years to break down. People have to think about the consequences of their actions, says Grace. 85058 will get your text through to 5 Live this evening. You can find me on Twitter. You can tweet us at BBC 5 Live. The Egyptian army, talking of social networking, has taken to Facebook tonight to deny that they're involved in a coup in the country. That said, they've given Egypt's rival politicians 48 hours to sort out their differences, or they say they will step in. Tomorrow's Times, army set to step in as Egypt slides into chaos. Millions of protesters have been calling for President Morsi to resign. He became Egypt's first Islamist president a year ago in an election widely considered free and fair. Do you remember that? That was following the 2011 revolution that toppled Hosni Mubarak. Let's speak now to the journalist and Middle East analyst Nabila Ramdani. Tell us what sparked off the scenes that we've seen in Egypt this weekend. What was the trigger for those?
Well, it has to be said that these protests have been planned to coincide with President Morsi's 1 year in power. I was in Egypt covering the elections last year when he was democratically elected with nearly 52% of the vote. And there has certainly been a build-up to these protests. The Tamarrud movement, or rebellion movement, as it was called by the protesters. And essentially, a large number of people are protesting against Mr. Morsi's legacy 1 year on. And they are simply and purely asking for his resignation. There's a sense of disappointment, to say the least, about his policies. There have been several spontaneous protests against Morsi's rule since his inauguration as president, but not on such a large scale. I mean, the Egyptian Interior Ministry said that approximately 17 million people have taken to the streets consistently over the last few days to make their voices heard. So they are clearly angry about Mr. Morsi's legacy, and they want to send him a strong message.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just reading now the account of one 24-year-old student in Tahrir Square that the Times have spoken to for their issue tomorrow. And the student says, I feel so relieved knowing that the army will force the government to accept the will of the people. The army, of course, were widely praised at the Arab Spring uprising, weren't they, for the way that they defended the people. But how much danger is Egypt in of living under martial law?
Well, absolutely. This is the crux of the matter, really. And this situation really reflects the perennial theme in Egyptian politics, that is to say, people attempting to rule the country either by democratic means or through a dictatorship, but the army is always lurking in the background and threatening to take over. And the army's ultimatum to the president and his government, essentially asking the president to sort out his political differences with his opponents, is seen as welcome by the protesters, or a section of the protesters, because the army is also threatening to take responsibility, as they put it, if a resolution to this crisis is not found, and it will put forward its own roadmap, which has been carefully worded. But essentially, the army is threatening to step in, and who guards the guards is an expression we're used to hearing in any context, but it couldn't be more relevant here.
Is there a sense that there's an uprising to get rid of one leader they don't like, a new leader comes in, and they don't like him either, so now we'll have another uprising?
Well, I think there's a sense of I apologize if people, find it a bit too simplistic if I put it that way, but there's a certain amount of immaturity behind those protests, because if you're disappointed with the rule of a president, it's one thing to make your voices heard, but to ask for his resignation 1 year on, given the massive challenges that Egypt is facing, not least of all economically, I think is a bit harsh on any president, and especially on a fledgling democracy like Egypt.
Now, is this a reflection of how fragile the democracy is then? Because obviously here we elect a government, and if we're not happy with them, it's tough for another 4 or 5 years.
Well, I think what the people are essentially saying is that the Muslim Brotherhood is allegedly too weak to govern. And matters certainly came to a head with the burning and looting of the headquarters in Cairo, in which 8 people were killed. But in total, 16 people have been killed in the protests, and hundreds were wounded in the clashes. Now, the allegation is that Morsi and that his government have failed and therefore the whole democratic system is failing. And certainly they see him as having failed on two very important fronts to guarantee security and indeed economic stability. But one has to bear in mind that Egypt is a huge country. It has 85 million people. 1 in 4 Egyptians live below the poverty line of less than $2 a day. It has very deep infrastructure problems. It is rudimentary, to say the least. The tourism industry was the most affected. The economy is essentially in tatters, and the Muslim Brotherhood is currently in talks with the International Monetary Fund to secure a loan of $4.8 billion to try and get the economy back on its feet. So very important challenges for the Muslim Brotherhood to sort out, really.
Nabila, thank you for explaining it to us. That's Middle East analyst and journalist Nabila Ramdani at 14 minutes past 11. Phil Williams here with you.